For months, children were told something was wrong with them, not because it was true, but because someone needed it to be. They were made to sit in quiet rooms, voices echoing off the walls as adults leaned forward and whispered carefully crafted words designed to break something inside them. And they believed it. Because when you're a child, you believe what grown-ups tell you. The question is, how far would you go in the name of science? And what happens when the experiment never really ends? The world looked normal on the outside. Red brick buildings, autumn leaves skimming across Midwestern sidewalks, church bells in the distance, the soft hum of classrooms filled with children reciting their lessons in unison. It was the late 1930s in Davenport, a place that felt safe, grounded, ordinary. A place where science was seen as progress, and universities were temples of hope. At the heart of it stood University of Iowa, respected, admired, known for its pioneering work in speech pathology. It was a field still young, still stretching its limbs, still searching for answers about how the human voice forms, and why sometimes it falters. Parents brought their children to specialists with trust in their eyes. Teachers referred students quietly. And tucked within this growing discipline was a question that fascinated researchers. Is stuttering born or made? Could something as delicate as a child's speech be shaped not just by biology, but by suggestion? To the public, this was a hopeful pursuit. Imagine curing stuttering. Imagine giving children confidence. Imagine unlocking the secrets of language itself. But beneath the polished floors and academic ambition, another idea was forming, and it did not feel hopeful. It began with a theory, one proposed by a respected speech pathologist named Wendell Johnson. He believed that stuttering might not simply be inherited. He believed it could be triggered, reinforced, grown. What if a child's normal speech hesitations were labeled as defective? What if authority figures pointed out tiny imperfections and called them serious problems? Would the child begin to stutter? And if so, could the mind create its own prison? It was a bold theory. Dangerous, if wrong. Revolutionary, if right. To test it, someone would need subjects, not adults. Adults were complicated, self-aware, resistant. Children were different. Children could be shaped. So in 1939, inside quiet university offices, a study was approved. It would later become known as the monster study. The name wasn't given by the researchers. It was given by someone who realized too late what they had done. The children came from the Iowa Soldiers Orphans Home, an orphanage, a place already heavy with silence, rows of iron beds, narrow hallways, the faint scent of starch and soap. Children who had already lost more than most adults ever would. They were easy to access. They had no parents to question procedures, no guardians to ask difficult questions, and perhaps most importantly, they trusted adults and authority. They were divided into groups. Some were told they spoke beautifully, that their voices were clear and strong. Others, children who did not stutter, were told something different. They were told they had a serious speech problem. They were told they needed to be careful when they spoke. They were interrupted, corrected. Watch closely. Every small stumble highlighted. You're starting to stutter. You need to slow down. Don't speak unless you're sure you can say it right. The words were calm, clinical, measured, but to a child they were heavy. At first, nothing dramatic happened. The children still played in the yard, still lined up for meals, still whispered secrets after lights out. But something subtle began to shift. One girl who once spoke freely began raising her hand less often. A boy who used to chatter through dinner started eating in silence. They were watching themselves now, listening for mistakes, afraid of their own voices. And fear is a powerful teacher. Weeks passed. Researchers took notes. Charts were filled. Patterns observed. Some children began hesitating mid-sentence, pausing longer than necessary, avoiding certain words entirely, not because they couldn't say them, but because they were afraid to try. Imagine being told, over and over, that something inside you is broken. Imagine that voice coming from a trusted adult, someone with a clipboard, someone from the university, someone important. Eventually, you would start to believe it. That was the point. The experiment wasn't loud. There were no dramatic confrontations, just quiet erosion, confidence thinning like paper left in the rain. One child reportedly stopped speaking almost entirely during sessions. Another became withdrawn, tense, anxious before interviews. The researchers noted changes, but the question lingered in the background. Were they witnessing proof of a theory or the harm of suggestion? Inside academic circles, the work was considered bold. Outside, no one knew. Because the children didn't go home and tell parents. They went back to their shared rooms, back to long hallways and quiet nights, back to thinking, maybe something is wrong with me. The study ended after several months. The data was compiled, but something unexpected happened. The results were never properly published. There was hesitation, concern. Even within the research team, discomfort began to grow. The lead graduate researcher, Mary Tudor, reportedly tried to reverse some of the damage. She returned to the orphanage to reassure the children, to tell them they spoke normally. But words, once planted, don't always come out so easily, especially when they have taken root in a child's identity. The university moved on. The world moved toward war. And the experiment faded into academic archives. For decades, almost no one outside a small circle knew what had happened inside those rooms. But the children grew up, and some of them carried something invisible with them. Lingering speech anxiety, shame, the sense that their voice, their very expression, was flawed. Years later, when journalists uncovered the story, the reaction was immediate. Outrage. How could researchers deliberately harm vulnerable children? How could an orphanage be used as a laboratory? The name monster study appeared in headlines. It wasn't just about stuttering anymore. It was about trust, about power, about what happens when curiosity overrides compassion. In the early 2000s, surviving participants filed lawsuits against the University of Iowa. Some described lifelong struggles, not dramatic, cinematic trauma, but something quieter. Hesitation, fear of public speaking, avoidance, a shadow where confidence should have been. The university eventually reached settlements. Apologies were issued. Statements were crafted carefully. The study was called regrettable, unethical by modern standards. But the children had lived through it without the comfort of modern standards. They lived through it as children, believing the adults were right, believing their voices were broken. And here is the part that unsettles people most. The study proved something, not just about stuttering, but about the power of suggestion. It showed that identity can be shaped by authority, that insecurity can be manufactured, that fear, when introduced early enough, can alter a life's trajectory. The damage wasn't visible on the surface. There were no scars, no dramatic medical procedures, just words. And sometimes words are enough. Today, ethics boards stand between researchers and human subjects. Consent forms are long. Oversight is strict. But those protections were written in part because of stories like this. Stories where ambition moved faster than empathy, where vulnerable children became data points, where a theory mattered more than a voice trembling in a small room. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear it. The echo of a child's sentence cut short, the pause before speaking, the second guessing, the internal whisper, "Don't get it wrong." The monster study is often remembered as a dark chapter in speech pathology, but it is also a warning about how easily trust can be misused, about how thin the line is between help and harm. Because the scariest part of this story isn't that it happened in the 1930s. It's that the logic behind it still exists. The belief that if knowledge can be gained, someone might decide the cost is worth it. Even if the cost is a child's confidence. Even if the cost is their voice. And if you think this was disturbing, wait until you hear what happened during the Tuskegee syphilis study. History has many rooms with closed doors. Some of them were built in the name of science, and some of them are still echoing. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe the hidden side of history deserves light, then stay with me. Because the past isn't silent, it's waiting to be heard. Subscribe, and let's keep opening the doors they hoped would stay closed.